कंसर्ट सर आप शुरू कीजिए सर बोलना.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Today evening, we have Dr. Rajvilas Narkade with us, who is going to speak on a very important topic, which is being discussed very seldom. An important aspect of surgical practice, which is taken very casually, and a topic which helps us to decrease the complications other than good surgery. The topic for today's webinar is preoperative optimization of surgical patients. So, with the permission of panelist Dr. Kaustubh Sada, who is online with us, I would request Dr. Rajvilas to start his webinar. Rajvilas, please.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for giving me the opportunity. I wish everybody a very warm evening today. So I'll just go through the details of basic things which we can do and adapt in our preoperative optimization for this patient, so that our patients, the outcomes are good and the outcomes can be improved again. So we need to know what is optimization exactly. So when you're preparing the patient for the surgery, so that with the intention that the patient's outcome should be good. So these all things can be covered under optimization. So there are a lot of questions with us. Exactly what is optimization? Who can do the optimization? Where to be done? Whether when the patient is admitted or patient is at home, when can it be done? And what are the different ways of optimization and which parameters need to be seen and optimized? So step by step, we need to learn that why this optimization is required. So only answer for this is to improve post-operative outcomes. So optimization goes hand in hand with outcomes. So if the patient is well optimized, you expect better outcomes. If the patients are poorly optimized, their optimization has not been done, they have some parameters lacking, then these things reflect in the post-operative period, and that we see increased risk of mortality or morbidity in the form of infective complications, anastomotic leak rates, as well as their long-term outcomes of the particular surgery. So what to do, what to optimize? So basically, there are a few components which commonly need to be seen, which are really neglected for these patients. One of the most important are the likes of nutrition, the optimization of their respiratory status, optimization of their chronic diseases which are either decompensated or deterred because of present conditions, then optimization of their medications, their infective complications, infective things before surgery. So who can do the optimization? Patient himself can do the optimization at home if the cases are elective ones. If there is no much time in these patients, or the patients are not patients are very poorly built, then these can be admitted and optimized by the consultant as well. So the optimization, not only the surgeon but his whole team can help in optimizing these patients, including physiotherapists, nutritionists, dietitians, the colleagues like physicians, and rest of the team. And timing of optimization. So this timing wholly and solely depends on what type of surgery the patient is undergoing. So if you have good amount of time, like if you're doing a surgery which is totally elective and patient is not in distress because of the present ailment, like surgeries which are uncomplicated hernias, where you have time, you can optimize the patient for a week, 10 days, month, 2 months, 6 months. So this timing differs depending on the timing of the or type of surgery. So the patients who are having malignancy, you can't wait for months together, but at least optimization of a week or 2 weeks can be done for these patients. So the time will depend on the type of ailment patient is having. Emergency cases and urgent cases like infective cases, we don't have much time for optimization. So that time of optimization of these patients will be limited. And how to do? So system-wise, we'll try to go through each component and how to select these patients who need optimization, what parameters to see, what are the easy and readily available things which can be done to optimize these patients, that we'll try to go through. So what exactly we want to optimize? We want to optimize the risk factors for this patient. So those risk factors which are non-modifiable, like age, their heart failure, chronic illnesses which have been compensated for a long time, then emergency nature of surgery, again chronic organ dysfunctions like COPD, chronic liver disease. So these patients, the optimization cannot be done to a great extent, and we have to go ahead with whatever possible patient's condition is there. So these ones cannot be optimized fully. Partly yes, partly they can be optimized. So those which are modifiable risk factors like nutrition, this can be optimized. The other risk factors like cardiologically, recent history of any MI or poor effort tolerance, or say medically managed acute coronary insufficiency. So these things, then pulmonary elements like recent infections, asthma, some components of restrictive lung diseases, hematological disorders like anemia, then any patients having anticoagulations, coagulopathies, some infections, and psychological components. These can be optimized very well. So we will be trying to focus on these components, which where optimization will help in improving the postoperative outcomes. So if you see nutrition, nutrition is one of the very commonly and frequently neglected thing. Just because patient comes to us for a surgery, that doesn't mean that the patient should get operated next day for whatsoever is the ailment. So for the emergency things, yes, definitely this should be done. But otherwise, if we improve nutrition, this directly reflects in the postoperative recovery, and this can help us minimize the risk, the postoperative complications, and improve the patient's outcomes. So whenever the patient is in some ailment, because of the element itself, patient nutrition status may decrease, patient may have weight loss, patient may have poor appetite, poor intake, and sometimes even if the appetite is good, the absorption part can be hampered because of the disease itself. So disease itself will reduce the nutrition. So a baseline poor nutrition will again go down with the help of disease. So if these patients are operated or treated immediately at that condition, then surgical stress will increase on the, and this surgical stress itself causes nutrition to go down. Then the surgery itself will reduce the oral intake and all that. So the nutrition keeps on going down. So if you want to break this ladder, we have to start optimally when the patient is at best nutrition status. So if you have time, definitely nutrition needs upper hand to correct it, and then we can build up on his nutrition, the surgery and hospitalization, and then instead of going down steeply, the nutrition will only fall to some extent, which will be still in an optimal level. It will never go to a suboptimal level of patient's clinical condition. So how to assess nutrition? There are lots of things where you can assess patient nutrition status. There are fancy things like dual energy X-ray, absorptiometry, you have MRI, you have CT scans, you have sonographies, you have DEXA scans. So with these things, you can calculate fat masses, red cell masses, fat-free skeletal muscle mass, bone mineral density. But these are all exotic things. But you cannot do all these things in the same patient on daily basis. So this is basically an overkill to assess nutrition. So we have some simplified areas or some simplified guidelines given by few societies where you can at least identify those patients who are at risk. So which patient exactly needs nutrition screening? Ideally, all patients should go for a screening. You screen them and find out which patient will benefit from optimization. So if we keep on optimizing all patients despite their having good nutrition, it does not become cost effective. And maybe that small amount of change might not make a huge difference in the outcomes. So these patients who have high risk of post-operative nutritional deficiencies and poor nutrition can be optimized on this level. Sometimes we always fear that patient aa jaya hai, operate kar lo, otherwise patient chala jayega. So this fear need to be kept aside when you are thinking of patients for major surgery. Smaller surgeries, daycare procedures, they might not make huge impact on nutrition thing, and outcomes may not change. But these patients who are there to undergo major surgeries, they definitely need to be screened well and optimized well. So patient optimization should be done with few criteria which are very simple to assess in the OPD basis as well. So these are the guidelines given by ISPEN 2017. So they said that if the patient is having a weight loss recently in last 6 months, approximately 10 to 15%, or more than 5% weight loss in last 3 months, then if the patient's BMI is less than 18, subjective global assessment, which is done on basis of history taking, which considers how much is the patient oral intake, what is patient's functional status, how much is the patient's illness affecting the nutrition, if that is in grade C, or if nutrition risk assessment score goes beyond 5, or even more easy than that, if the albumin is less than 3 or transferrin is less than 200 patients, then these patients are more likely that they are having poor nutrition and will definitely benefit from optimization of these patients. So albumin and transferrin, as we all know, they are more for acute phase reactants. So in cases of acute infective things or acute conditions, they might not reflect well. But the first 2 or 3 components definitely will help us segregating those patients who will definitely need optimization. And as the screen shows that the hepatic and renal dysfunctions, definitely they will show some amount of skewing on the albumin levels and transferrin levels. So these values may not correctly or accurately reflect their baseline nutrition status. So this is just a rough framework how to assess the patient. This has been given by Duke's University. So they have done perioperative nutrition status screening depending upon only blood, BMI and weight loss. And once you found that the BMI and weight loss, you screen them and then you go for albumin. They have added vitamin D levels. Again, we don't check vitamin D levels very frequently, so you can skip that. And with that, we can find out which patients are there who will need nutrition supplementation. So what is the timing? So various guidelines like ISPEN guidelines, then American Society of Nutrition guidelines, they have already given that. So if a patient is given at least 7 to 14 days of nutrition perioperatively, that definitely reflects good outcomes in postoperative period. So less than 7 days nutrition supplement or for a couple of days, that does not really much help in postoperative period. So this has been shown that even patient is having malignancy, you can definitely wait for 7 to 14 days till the nutrition is completely not even complete, but it's taken care for some time. So nutritional improvement has shown that they will there are lots of infective complications can be reduced. The anastomotic or you can say the anastomotic leaks, they can be reduced, and overall mortality and morbidity has also been reduced with the help of preoperative nutrition. So what type of nutrition to be given? So here we'll see, whenever feasible, the preferred choice is always enteral nutrition. So in enteral nutrition, what is the preferred choice? Definitely a oral nutrition than a tube feeding. So if a patient is on OPD basis, you can definitely explain them or you can assess them what is their exact oral nutrition intake. If the oral nutrition intake is up to the mark, like that is the energy requirement of at least 20 kilocalories per kilogram, or protein intake of approximately 1 gram per kilogram, then you can ask them to continue the same nutrition and build them over a period of 7 to 10 days. Additionally, we can add oral supplements, or we can explain them dietary changes like they should increase proteins in their own diet, like eggs, pulses, and all, so that the nutrition can be improved. So if oral intake is poor, which is commonly seen in those patients who are having malignancies or who are poorly built, or one of these last 4 parameters are positive, they are usually deficient in their oral intake as well. So these patients definitely help by enteral feeding. By you can additionally use supplements in the form of protein supplements. You can give energy dense formulas like polymeric feeds, and this can help us improving the nutrition of these patients. So if they are not tolerating orally at all, then in these patients you can try tube feedings. So you can put a nasogastric tube or nasovaginal tube depending on the pathology, and start feeding them so that the protein intake increases, energy intake increases, and the nutrition level of these patients can be improved to some extent. So if you compare the addition of parenteral nutrition to enteral nutrition, does it help? Not really. There are a couple of studies which has been shown that parenteral nutrition itself does not have any additional advantage. Itself, there are few downfalls of that. There are the line related or access related complications are slightly more. So they don't fare as good as an enteral nutrition. But if enteral nutrition is not possible, I mean, patient has some blockade in the GI tract where, or there is some absorption issues, or if the patient is not tolerating the nutrition because of multiple vomitings, bloating, and distension of abdomen or obstructive features like that, then parenteral nutrition can be given as a addendum to the enteral nutrition. And aim is to rectify the total amount of calories he is getting. Aim is to rectify the total amount of proteins he is receiving. So both parenteral and nutrition can be considered depending on the clinical condition of the patient, so that with considering the ultimate goal of achieving the desired limit. So what can be given? So as we said, if the patient is on ambulatory OPD basis, the patient can continue taking oral diet, and that can be the calorie and protein intake can be increased by explaining them by the dietitian or by surgeon what foods will give them better quality of proteins and energy. So if that is not adequate, you can go for protein and calorie supplements. There are multiple protein supplements in market which has been with various levels of proteins. Some are vegetable based, some are animal protein based. So either polymeric or monomeric feeds can be given. So of these polymeric feeds are feeds of choice. Monomeric feeds are usually avoided unless and until patients have short gastric, short bowel syndromes or is absorption issues. Or patient with enzymatic or pancreatic insufficiencies where monomeric feeds can be given. The next thing comes is the immunonutrition. So immunonutrition has been recently added since last few years. So it includes majority of the essential amino acids like arginine, then omega-3 fatty acids and nucleotides. So normally ISPN recommends this to be given for at least 5 to 7 days, especially in cancer patients. So these have been known and they have been proven basically in multiple studies that they definitely improve the post-operative outcomes in the form of shorter hospital stay or lower rate of infection. So there are few RCTs. So these these are meta-analyses which have evaluated randomized control trials comparing only standard enteral or parenteral nutrition or interparenteral along with immunonutrition. So most of these patients have shown that the nutritional component is taken care very nicely with this nutrition of additional nutrition, and this definitely helps in improving post-operative morbidity and mortality in the form of shorter stay and low rates of infection. And most commonly these are studied in GI patients, so definitely GI patient it will help, so that can be given for 5 to 7 days. Secondly, we need to do metabolic condition of these patients. So even the patients are not diabetic, prolonged fasting levels can cause some amount of insulin resistance momentarily, and this can have implications in post-operative recovery. So normally ESPN guidelines they advise not to give fasting period of overnight or a very long period of fasting more than 6 hours. So preferably they say for solids you should have fasting period of 6 hours, and for liquids you can keep it as low as 2 hours, where you can give clear liquids which are rich in carbohydrates in the form of some of the juices, clear juices can be given. So this metabolic conditioning has been incorporated in the ERAS protocol, which has been widely used for colorectal, then ambulatory surgeries and other surgeries as well. So this helps in improving post-operative outcomes and early recovery after the surgery. So second thing which comes in picture is the pulmonary optimization. So even if patient is not having any pulmonary pathology per se, but if there are risk factors which can impair pulmonary pathology in post-operative period or which can make the patient prone for pulmonary decompensation in the post-operative period, these should be optimized. So like smoking cessation, smoking, I mean obviously not everybody will tell you that they are smoking, but if patient is admitting, if you know, you should request them at least to stop the smoking, and the statistically proven effect of smoking cessation comes only after 8 weeks. That has been proven by Mayo Hospital study, where they have studied that thing in cardiothoracic, then abdominal surgeries and orthopedic surgeries, where they have shown that smoking cessation helps in post-operative recovery after patients who have undergone surgeries in general anesthesia. So if the surgeries can be postponed for that much duration, like hernia surgeries, elective surgeries like bariatric surgery or lifestyle surgeries, these patients can be optimized depending upon the smoking thing. So once the patient stops smoking, the ciliary dysfunction which is occurred with the smoke and the associated thing, it improves. It improves clearing of the respiratory secretions, and even the smoking cessation has shown that it also reduces respiratory muscle dysfunction, and this dysfunction reversal helps in reduction in complications which are associated with extubation and intraoperative and postoperative ventilation. So this can be done. The other optimization things which are commonly seen are those patients who have some of the other respiratory ailments like COPD, asthma, bronchitis, or some of infective pathology in the lung. So these can be medically optimized by giving them respective medications like antibiotics in infective things, bronchitis, they can respond to anti-allergic and steroids, and same with asthma, they can respond to bronchodilators. So apart from this, if you see those patients who have undergone the major surgery, they should always be told to undergo a respiratory physiotherapy in the form of either they can undergo a formal physiotherapy with chest, or they can have a muscle training for inspiratory and expiratory muscles. They can have a breathing exercise in the form of breathing, deep breathing, post expiration, and most importantly, incentive spirometry. So there have been multiple studies which have shown that a single thing, one of them four, will not help at one go. You have to couple one thing with other things. So if you couple spirometry with some other exercise, that definitely helps. So preoperative incentive spirometry was studied in detail by Restrepo in 2011. So those patients who were just doing spirometry and those patients who have no previous pulmonary complication, they didn't get much help after just doing spirometry. So what he studied was it has to be coupled with other breathing exercises or active chest PT or muscle strengthening exercises. So these patients definitely get reduced pulmonary complications following surgery. And if there are some volume-based parameters available, which will tell how much effort patient is putting. So if the patient gets a visual and visual feedback of how much effort he is putting, so that buildup of spirometry over a period of week or two, it will improve his lung function and definitely helps to reduce the post-operative pulmonary complications or infective complications. So spirometry has also shown to help patients with COPD to clear the cough because their cough reflexes are quite suppressed, and also there is ciliary dysfunction which can be taken care with this. Although this was just a single case control study, it has not been proven in RCTs, but it is very cost effective. You don't need to put any efforts. So definitely putting these things in practice will help reduce pulmonary complications. So the another component is preoperative exercise therapy. So if the patient keeps some amount of exercise for almost 8 weeks, that has shown statistically in cardiological cases to prevent pulmonary complications. So obviously doing exercise for 8 weeks or twice in a week is not feasible to put in our setup, that we cannot ask every patient to go, because the other factors like obesity, then again joint dysfunction, respiratory things, they come in picture. So this might not be feasible, but definitely everybody can do respiratory incentive spirometry along with breathing exercises to the patient, and that will help us in reducing the post-operative complications. Then those patients who are at risk of having OSA or who has significant OSAs, they need to be diagnosed on time. So there is a stop criteria for OSA. Commonly those surgeons who are doing bariatric surgeries, they do assess these, they do diagnose these OSAs. And once the diagnosis of OSA is done, they should be optimized by giving adequate training to these patients and adequate respiratory activities and respiratory support preoperatively as well as postoperatively, so that this can be managed well. Then second comes the cardiac optimization. So routine evaluation of the cardiac evaluation we normally do in at-risk individuals. So those patients who are more than 60 years of age, those who are having cardiac problems in past, who have undergone cardiac bypasses, who have undergone percutaneous interventions. So these patients need to be optimized, or these needs to be evaluated. So the easiest way to evaluate them is 6-minute walk test. Ask them to walk for 6 minutes, see a change in pulse, see the change in BP, see the change in saturation. So that will give us a rough guide of the exercise tolerance of the patient, how good is the pulmonary function. And still, if the patient is not able to maintain this walk test, then we have other tests to assess the patients in the form of 2D echo, then stress tests like treadmill or dobutamine stress echo. Or if these these tests are not helping, or if the patient is very sick, the echo or the ejection fractions are low, then functional imaging can be done by thallium scan as well. But these things can be better done when consulting the cardiologist. So better should not take headache of these things because of maybe medical implications as well as medical legal implications. So most commonly we see this patients are undergone only PTCA. So then the questions come whether to operate them or not. But then there are a few things, if we understand the pathology, then we can understand when we can operate them at best, or what is the ideal time to do surgery and what things can be done for them. So post PTCA patient, either they will have drug-eluting stents placed or they have a bare metal stent placed. So usually, most commonly, these patients, if they are stented, they will be either most commonly on dual antiplatelets. Patients managed medically, they usually are on single antiplatelets. With stents are usually on dual antiplatelets called as DPAT. So if a bare metal stented patient comes to you less than a month from the stenting, then it is very risky for us to operate, because with dual antiplatelet there is definitely a risk of bleeding, and if we stop the antiplatelet, there is a very high chance that these stents will get thrombosed. So the recommendations by American Heart Association is that if possible delay the surgery, and if surgery cannot be delayed for whatsoever is the reason, then operate the patient with dual antiplatelet, manage the bleeding with whatsoever applications you have. Because if these anticoagulants or antiplatelets are stopped, the chances of thrombosis of stent or cardiac events are very high. So if these patients are more than 1 month in duration, definitely we can proceed with surgery, and dual antiplatelet can be stopped in consultation with the cardiologist. That will just briefly discuss when we come to the antiplatelet management. So what if the patient is having drug-eluting stent? So drug-eluting stents are more thrombogenic. So they have very high thrombotic potential if antiplatelets are stopped. So if the patient is less than 3 months from post-PTCA for a drug-eluting stent, definitely the antiplatelets cannot be stopped, and you should defer the surgery as much as possible. For emergency thing, again, you can go ahead with surgery after describing the patient the possible risk of bleeding and possible risk of stent thrombosis on stopping the dual antiplatelet. So these patients, if bleeding is there, we can manage by either compression or hemostatic agents. And the last thing what we can do is do platelet transfusion, explain the risk of stent thrombosis. So, and if the patient is having these stent placed more than 6 months in duration, you can safely stop the dual antiplatelet as in consultation with the cardiology personnel and go ahead with surgery. In between, that is 3 to 6 months, is definitely a gray area. Here, the recommendations are also not uniformly given by the guidelines like American Heart or American Cardiology Association. So they say you can weigh the risk of bleeding versus stent thrombosis, and accordingly you can take the decision after consultation with the cardiologist and the family whether to continue antiplatelets or stop. So most common antiplatelet which we see in our practice, which patients are taking, are either aspirin or aspirin plus clopidogrel, or they are on especially ticagrelor, which are the recent ones. So aspirin need not be stopped in any patient whatsoever is the surgery, even for major surgeries where the risk of bleeding is expected, like hepatectomies, even pancreatic resections. These patients also need to aspirin to be continued. Those patients who are on only clopidogrel, these patients we can stop clopidogrel for 5 days, and in the meantime they can be switched out to aspirin so that the thrombotic potential of the stent reduces. Prasugrel is over. So basically all these are irreversible platelet inactivators. So the prasugrel can take, the effect takes almost 7 days for it to go off until the complete platelet pool is replenished. That's why where the antiplatelet property will come down. So that needs to be stopped for 7 days. And the newest thing is the Brilinta drug, that is ticagrelor. So this has to be stopped for 5 days. So during these 5 days, these patients can be continued on aspirin, because there have been few studies where they have shown that they have compared giving either low molecular weight heparin as a bridging therapy for these patients, because LMWH can be stopped 24 hours prior to surgery. So unfractionated heparin should not be given because it causes activation of platelets early and chances of stent thrombosis are very high. So unfractionated heparin is not advisable. LMWH as a as a bridging therapy can be given, but it does not have good effect as like an antiplatelet drug. So still it can have some amount of thrombotic potential for the stents. So the ideal drug they say to give bridge is aspirin. So even if the ticagrelor can be stopped 5 days prior, aspirin to be continued, and you can operate this patient with calculated risk. So there's another set of patients which not routinely but sparingly comes to our OP, that these patients have some of the other implantable cardiac electronic devices, most commonly pacemakers. So these patients, although the duration of surgery and type of surgery will not matter, but these patients need to be carefully monitored. So ideal thing is that we can call the company person who manages this pacemaker to the OT, so that he can reprogram the pacemakers during surgery and keep on monitoring them. So these patients, if the surgery is in the upper abdomen or in the chest or in the upper thorax, head, face, neck, then definitely there is a very high risk of having a dysfunction in the pacemakers because of the cautery currents. So we can avoid the use of monoblock cautery as much as possible for this patient, or you can reprogram or activate and reactivate this patient during surgery. So the risk is definitely higher for above umbilicus and thoracic surgery. So after surgery, these pacemakers need to be reprogrammed and optimized. So we have to explain these details to the patient. We have to call the personnel to the OT and can be done. And definitely bipolar is safe because the arc of current does not travel through the body. It is between the two electrodes, so that can be safely used. So thromboprophylaxis is the second thing which comes. So we have many patients who are definitely high risk of thrombotic complication in the post-op period. Most commonly is the deep vein thrombosis, and the subsequent complication that comes is even more dreadful is the pulmonary thromboembolism. So we have to stratify the patient who are at risk, who are at high risk, and who are at minor risk, and who are at low risk. So after this stratification, you can give the patients pre-operative or intra or post-operative thromboprophylaxis. So definitely the easiest one and without any complication is the SCDs, that is threaded elastic compression stockings. So they can be given pre-operatively at least 12 to 24 hours before surgery. And the other ones are the pneumatic cuff compression, which is machine operated, that can be given pre, intra as well as post-operatively. So you can stratify the patient depending on the risk factors. So those patients who have malignancies, who are obese, pelvic surgeries, prolonged surgeries more than 120 minutes, 2 hours, then joint-related orthopedic surgeries. So these are commonly seen as a major risk factors, and definitely who has some amount of other thrombogenic states like thrombophilia or any factor deficiencies or excess which can cause thrombotic complication, and these should be definitely supported with low molecular weight heparins. So I think the pre-operatively very seldom drug therapy is given for these patients. So there are a very special group of patients like bariatric surgery patients. They are obese, they have multiple comorbid illnesses, they have chances of venous insufficiency. So these are normally most of symptoms believe that they give low molecular weight heparin at least 12 to 24 hours before surgery. So despite giving LNWA, it is very safe to operate these patients. So that can be considered. So you can risk stratify, and depending upon that, we can think what type of these three which compound can be given to these patients. So other hematological optimization which takes care of anemia. So we have to see that patient is adequately oxygenated because the oxygen carrying capacity depends on hemoglobin and anemia needs to be corrected. So again, what type of correction need to be given, that depends on what type of surgery is patient undergoing, whether it's emergency, urgent or elective. For elective patients, we can definitely delay the surgery. We can optimize this patient for surgery and give oral hematinics, diet rich in iron, give folic acid and B12 supplements so that these patients hemoglobin can be optimized by oral means. So if that much duration is not available, if you have almost 2 to 3 weeks available with you, you can also give some IV supplements by giving IV, and you can optimize. So if the patient has urgent or semi-urgent need for surgery, then blood transfusion should be given at least 24 to 48 hours before surgery. So why this is important? I don't think, I mean, normally whenever there is a hemoglobin is low, we straight away give blood transfusion and next day we operate. But whatever blood we are giving to the patient, we need to know whether that blood is going to serve the purpose or not. So when a stored blood is given to the patient, that does not increase the oxygen carrying capacity to the extent of the amount of hemoglobin. So that just gives you that the hemoglobin has increased, but the oxygen carrying capacity has not increased. The reason is that the 2,3 bisphosphogluconate present in the RBCs is normally helps in oxygen carrying in the hemoglobin. So that is depleted in stored blood. So it takes at least 24 to 48 hours for our body to replenish that enzyme so that the oxygen carrying capacity of that hemoglobin molecule can be optimized. So if you're transfusing, please transfuse it before 24 hours or at least 48 hours, ideally before surgery, for optimizing these patients. The second thing which comes in picture is that what amount of hemoglobin should target for these patients to undergo a safe surgery. So for a routine, normal, adult, healthy male, if the hemoglobin is less than 8, you need to start optimizing these patients. So for a normal person, you can consider the transfusion limit as 8. For patients with cardiac or risk factors, you can keep it as 9 or sometimes on the safer side as a 10. And then transfusion can be given at least 4 hours. For the patients who are on emergency basis, they can be immediately transfused. And in these patients, we should transfuse freshly available blood. So you can have blood which is available in your blood bank, which is 30 days old versus 2 days old. So then 2 days old blood can be used, so that will help the purpose. Then anticoagulation. So there are some patients who are anticoagulation for different things, like any old history of DVT, any old history of cardiac valve replacement done, where these patients are started with anticoagulation, any old episodes of PE. So these patients and those who are having known any thrombogenic states, so they are on anticoagulation. So these patients need to be carefully stratified depending on the risk of bleeding. So risk of bleeding can be stratified on the type of surgery they are undergoing. So those surgeries which are having increased bleeding or blood complication rates, so like hepatectomies, pancreatic dissections, vascular surgeries, thoracic surgeries, CMVGs. So these surgeries are called as high risk of bleeding, and you have to stratify the patient on the thrombotic complications. What is the risk of thrombotic complication in this patient if we stop the anticoagulant? So these need to be carefully discussed with patient, and the decision should be taken whether to stop or bridge these anticoagulants so that the risk of thrombotic complication should be minimized and risk of bleeding is also minimized. So we have to find a golden midway for these patients. So most common anticoagulation which normally most patients are on is warfarin. So normally if the patient is at low risk, having superficial surgery or surgery with there is less risk of bleeding, so we need not breach these patients. We can just stop the warfarin and continue. If the indication for starting warfarin was something like old history of DVT, which was few months or years back, then maybe you can stop it for 5 days and no need for any bleaching. So those patients who are high risk or medium risk of causing thrombotic complication, these patients need to consider the bridging therapy with either heparin, that is unfractionated heparin, or low molecular weight heparin. Usually, we have to stop the warfarin at least 5 days prior to the surgery. Same after stopping the warfarin, same day you can start LMWH or unfractionated heparin. So if you are giving LMWH, then at least 24 to 12 hours before surgery you can stop them, and unfractionated heparin can be stopped at least 4 to 6 hours before surgery, and same thing after 12 to 14 hours or 12 to 24 hours we can restart this medication. So there are other set of medications like direct thrombin inhibitors like dapagliflozin, or factor 10 inhibitors like rivaroxaban, which is commonly known as Xarelto, or apixaban. So these are ones which causes direct inhibition of thrombin and factor 10 respectively, and the effect of anticoagulation is depending upon their duration of action. So if the patient is taking direct thrombin inhibitors, you have to see how is the renal function. If the renal function is compromised, then the chances of drug getting metabolized out of the body is less. So the drug retention levels are very high. So these patients, we have to stop at least for 3 to 5 days before we start the surgery. And along with the day you stop this medication, you have to bridge them with LMWH or unfractionated heparin, and then continue these medication 12 to 24 after the surgery. The rivaroxaban and apixaban, they can be stopped at least 3 days, which has been shown in trial, Rocket Air trial as well, that it can be safely stopped with the bridging of LMWH. The second is control of after that we have to see whether the patient is having any occult infections or not. So normally those patients who electively operate are usually not infected, but those patients who are at high risk of infection, like those who have biliary stasis or those are stented patients, like in we see and me being GI surgeon, we commonly see across patients who are stented for biliary complications or biliary tumors, pancreatic tumors. So these patients, if there is an occult infection, means patient is not having fever, patient is not having raised counts, patient is relatively healthy, and still if the CRP is high, so normally CRP and obesity reflects that there is an occult infection going on. So if these patients are operated at high CRP levels, there are chances are there that the infective complications usually increase in the form of either wound-related infections or intravenous infections or bloodstream or biliary infections. So if we give antibiotic course for a week or 10 days and see the CRP has normalized, our atlas has come less than 50. So these patients usually improve or they fare very nicely to the post-operative complications. One of the study was recently published by Dr. Jagannath and his team, where high CRP levels were compared to those where CRP level were downgraded to a normal level after antibiotic therapy, and they were studied. So they found that significantly infective complications were reduced, specifically in Whipple. Then other type of disease specific optimization also can be done, but this will go in, I mean, not routinely we'll see these patients for our surgical routines. So if the patient is having cirrhosis, then definitely we need to control the etiology. If the patient is taking alcohol, we have to stop that. If the patient is having hepatitis B or C, we have to give medications like anti-hepatitis B or hepatitis C antiviral medications to reduce the viral load. Then we have to give them low salt diet, diuretics, you can albumin infusion given so that the decompensated state can be compensated well before surgery. We can stratify them depending on their liver function, and then we can explain these things to the patients and then go ahead for surgery. Other patients which commonly can be seen as CKD patients, which where we can avoid nephrotoxic drugs, we can adequately hydrate them, and as well as pre-operatively or intraoperatively, we can take over renal replacement therapy with the help of our nephrologist colleagues, and we can treat these patients. Other patients which are like HIV patients, these patients need to be optimized by adequately controlling their viral load, because if we operate these patients with a high viral load with significantly low levels of CD4 counts, then these patients definitely don't do well after surgery, because they will have more of infective complications and disease-related flaring of things if we operate them. So optimally, they should be optimized with the help of ART, and the CD4 count should be kept at least more than 200 if feasible and if the time permits, and then they can be operated to reduce the complication. The second thing which I have not shown on the slide is the psychological optimization of the patients. So although this has not been given in books, there are few studies have shown that if the patients are psychologically counseled well, the outcomes definitely improve depending upon their amount of understanding. So you need to explain the patient in detail about his risk for that particular disease, what is the exact treatment, what is the amount, what is the tentative timeline with his recovery point of view. So if these patients are optimized well, they are taken in view for improving their optimization in the preoperative period, definitely the postoperative outcomes are better. So the patient who are given preoperative intensive spirometry, at least they know what amount of capacity they have to do spirometry. So you can insist them to do the spirometry level up to the same extent even after surgery. So this will help in definitely reducing the complication from the pulmonary point of view. Say you are doing splenectomies and all that, upper GI surgeries. So these patients are definitely have risk of development of atelectasis in the lower part of the lungs. So this can be very well reduced and prevented by giving spirometry. So if the patient is well optimized from the psychological point of view, even that psychic thing also helps in improving the post-operative outcomes of these patients. I think I tried to cover major points. Obviously, I don't know whether I must have missed few things where very disease-specific optimization can also be done, like bariatric patients. So these are completely elective patients. So most of the bariatric surgery units, they usually have an optimizing protocol for at least 1 or 2 months. But they can have almost 6 months protocols, so that these patients can be first initially asked for to reduce the weight for 6 months if they are helped with the help of dietitian as well as exercise and physiotherapist to reduce that. we are optimized from the dietary point of view over a period of at least 1 month before surgery. And last 8 days of surgery usually they give more of a obesity liquid diet, so that the surgery can be done with less complications, and these patients can be managed on the basis of their respective etiologies and can be optimized well. So I think this is end of the talk. I'll be more than happy if I could answer any questions if there are.
Thank you, Rajvilas. Thank you for this lucid presentation. I hand over the mic to Meenakshi Madam. She is a panelist today. Meenakshi Madam, your comments and if questions you have some. Meenakshi Madam, you are not audible, Meenakshi Madam. We cannot hear you.
Now, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. Yeah.
Very nice presentation, but a few points just I want to know about how you will go ahead with diabetic patients.
Ma'am, diabetic patients definitely, if the sugars are not controlled, they need to optimize their sugar control as well, because increased sugar levels and perioperative hyperglycemia have definitely shown increased complications in the infective complications and delayed wound healing in this patient. So those patients, when we evaluate, definitely for a diabetic patient, we need to do HbA1c levels, and if they are very high, surgery we can optimize the patient by giving good amount of diabetic medications and bring down the HbA1c levels, and then we can operate them. If surgeries are emergencies, then we can shift over to the insulin, control the sugars for the thing, and continue a good glycemic control in the perioperative period to improve these patients.
Okay. And one more, this about this clopidogrel.
Yeah.
When we are getting the patients of gangrene and we want to post for amputations, then how to go ahead?
So gangrene is an emergency condition. Yeah, this is an emergency condition. So we need to explain these patients that the clopidogrel effect will not go for next 5 days. So it being an antiplatelet drug, only thing which can counteract that is the fresh platelet transfusions. So as I rightly said, we have to explain the risk of, now we are stopping clopidogrel for the risk of bleeding. But if we give platelets, the thrombotic potential of the stents which are lying in the heart or the plaques which are lying in the vessels will increase. So explain about the risk and benefit of this thing, and then we have to go ahead with platelet transfusion if the patient is bleeding. Otherwise, gangrene, we can have a tourniquet usage to reduce the bleeding and go ahead with the surgery.
Okay, and one more point I want to ask about this polymeric and monomeric feeds.
Yeah.
So, which are the available preparations in the market and the cost?
Feeds are multiple. So, like we have, every company makes Ensure ones. The Abbott one makes Ensure. Then I think Pentasure is there from other company. So different will have different amount of proteins. One is Nepro. So protein levels will change with that. So these are non-digested proteins which patient need to digest. So that's why they are the first choice medications. So many monomeric diets are only given to those patients who can't digest them. So if the gut is short, where digestion is not possible, pancreas is weak, biliary diversion is there. So these patients will help more from monomeric feeds. So cost varies between 400-500 rupees per tin to around 800 rupees per tin, depending upon the company and ingredients.
Thank you, Meenakshi Madam. I hand over.
Very simple question about this. Okay. Just I want to ask, what should be the optimum level of hemoglobin for elective cases?
Greater the level is better. So whatever level is as normal as possible. So normal level is the optimal level. But you have to see what one patient risk factor, whether the active bleeding is there or not, if the patient is losing blood or not. So that way, if the patient is falling in the transfusion criteria list, in these patients, if you have time, you can still optimize this patient by giving oral or IV medication, IV iron supplements. So for a normal patient, if it's going below 8,
Okay, thank
that
you.
is for giving transfusions.
Okay. Kaustubh, you as a panelist, you have some questions you may ask him or
Yeah,
some
I have one
comments. Please.
question, sir. Yeah, so, Dr. Rajvilas, it was very precise description. I just want to know, should we use actrapid insulin, or we should be using biphasic insulin in perioperative period per se?
Sir, actually, this decision I will give this decision to one of my diabetic persons who is managing the patient. But ideally, what happens is if you are giving long-acting insulin, then the sugars may vary widely. So normally, what else the physicians and endocrinologists giving is they give short-acting insulins. So actrapid is normally given for most patients to control when the patient is not taking oral diet. So once they shift to oral diet, then other insulins can be used. But for an NDM or a low intake diet, definitely they use actrapid so that sugar is controlled nicely and it is checked frequently. I think every 2 hourly or every 4 hourly they check.
Okay, sir. And what should be the precise time for applying LMWH? 6 hours or 24 hours prior to surgery?
So
For elective, non-cardiac and long-acting surgeries.
Yeah. So those patients who are at high risk of thrombogenic potential or DVT risk. So normally 24 to 12 hours before surgery is the ideal time to give LMWH prophylaxis. So the obesity societies normally advocate 12 hours before, one night prior to the surgery. So if you're doing surgery next day morning, one night prior you can give 0.1 mg per kg per kilogram subcutaneous dose one night prior. So that is guidelines obesity societies. But other societies, I don't think there are particular guidelines like this.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kaustubh. Now we will take audience questions. We have hand raised by Dr. Amit Pujari. Amit, I unmuted your mic. Please unmute it. You may ask your questions.
Okay. Good evening, sir. Thanks for allowing me to ask the question. Am I audible?
Yeah,
Yes,
Amit, you are very much audible. Please.
Yeah. Thank you, sir, for a nice presentation. My question is regarding aspirin use. There are two types of aspirin which are prescribed to the patient, 75 milligram and 150 milligram. So what is your, I want your opinion and advice on how to discontinue them before surgery.
The American Heart Association guidelines, they say you should not stop aspirin at all. So the minimum of aspirin normally which cardiologists permit the patient or we permit the cardiologist to put in our patient is almost 75 mg per day dose. So even if they're taking 150, they can be reduced to 75 and we can go ahead with surgery. And aspirin has not been told to stop at all because they say the risk of bleeding is definitely not more than risk of thrombosis. So we have to weigh the risk of bleeding and thrombosis here. So aspirin need to be continued. Other antiplatelets you can stop.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Amit, apart from that, I would like to also add that in the perioperative period, it is very important in a patient who has a cardiac stent that BP should not be lowered less than 80. If patient lands up in hypotension because of bleeding, or if the surgeon is requesting the anesthetist to keep the BP down, there are very high chances of stent thrombosis. So in patients with stents, the care should be taken. BP should be maintained minimum 80 and 90 throughout the surgery. It should not go too much down. Otherwise, it will land up in stent thrombosis.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Rajvilas, I want to ask a question from my side. I have a patient of carcinoma esophagus, 60 years old patient, and we have done his endoscopy just 3 days back. Patient CT is clear. There is a growth in middle 1/3, no metastasis, few lymph nodes. Patient is a chronic smoker. Basically, he was admitted in Sari ward with respiratory complaints. Now, as his respiratory complaints were settled, he was shifted to medicine ward, and then patient was evaluated for symptoms of dysphagia. We did his endoscopy. He had a growth. We are waiting for the biopsy report, and it is a completely occluding growth. Even a small Rayleigh tube of 12 could not be negotiated. So in such a patient, how would you advise to manage his nutrition and pre-op optimization? And his CT thorax is showing that there are few fibrotic bands in his left side chest. I am planning a thoracotomy with esophagectomy.
Right. So you yourself have clarified the things which we need to optimize. One is pulmonary one, because being the occluded growth he must have some micro aspirations to cause some infective complication in the lung. So pulmonary need to be addressed. Second is nutrition. Third is infective complication, and fourth is respiratory optimization for this patient. So as you asked for specific about nutrition, so being a middle third, I think your plan must be for preoperative chemoradiation followed by surgery, if possible. So if that you're planning, you have to go for at least to start nutrition. If you're getting time for chemoradiation, the same time you can utilize for improving the nutrition of these patients. So since the right side is not going, I think operatively you have to go and do a feeding jejunostomy. Rightly, we will not be doing feeding gastrostomy because the stomach will be used as a conduit for the esophageal resection.
Conduit, stomach tube. Yeah.
So yes, so just before starting your chemoradiation, you can do a feeding gastrostomy or feeding jejunostomy and start entering nutrition for these patients. If you enter nutrition over the period where the patient is getting chemoradiation, and definitely with a nutrition of at least 6 to 8 weeks, patient will have a nutritional breakdown and you can do surgery. But if you're not planning for chemoradiation, you want to go for surgery directly. But again, there are other ways to optimize the nutrition apart from putting the entrance tube. So again, you have to do a surgery, put a enterostomy tube, nutrition for at least 7 to 14 days as given by ESPEN guidelines, and then you can take the patient to surgery. And obviously, meantime, you can optimize the patient for pulmonary things like spirometry, give antibiotics so that the aspiration can be minimized, and give cardiac thing. If anything is there, you can evaluate them and then go to surgery for this.
Do you advise giving bronchodilators and mucolytics preoperatively in such patients?
If the patient is having any respiratory ailment, like if he has some form of COPD, if there is some restrictive lung disease, then definitely mucolytics can be helped. But bronchodilator, I don't think they are as such recommended preoperatively. Yes, intra and post-op they are usually given because the post-operatively the lung ventilation will not be good because of the pain component of the circuit. So they will have hypoventilation and they can have fluid secretion in the lung. So post-operatively the bronchodilator as well as mucolytics will definitely help.
Okay. Thank you, Rajvilas. We have senior surgeon Dr. Padole sir with us. Padole sir, I am unmuting your mic. We would like to hear some comments from your side and some of your experiences. Padole sir, are you there? Padole sir. We even have Vag sir with us. Vag sir, I am unmuting your mic. You may ask some questions or some comments, please. Vag sir, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Vag sir, please. We can hear you.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible. Yeah.
The general surgeon which are working in a tertiary care hospital, they usually face this problem of nutrition, especially patient coming from the rural area.
Right.
Hello.
Hello, you are audible, sir. Please go ahead.
And improving nutrition, it is all right that in textbook what they see, what the sir has recommended, but most of the time we don't have much time to improve their nutrition. Sometimes we have to operate upon them on emergency basis, and post-operatively if you try to improve their nutrition, most of the time it goes waste. In such situation, how to tackle this problem?
Sir, emergency when you have no option. You cannot optimize this patient overnight or within few hours. So in emergency, I understand we cannot optimize. So as I rightly said, the patients come from rural background and they don't have much resources. So at least whatever foods can be made available to them at cheaper cost, you can explain them. And you can ask them to have pulses, some amount of it, they can eat some meat, non-veg, they can have that. So at least good dietary counseling will itself help. If you ask them to come back after 15 days by following the good dietary advice, definitely they will have a relatively better nutrition and the outcome will definitely increase. So if you want to increase or improve their outcomes, then definitely this can be done.
Sir, another problem we face is of the raising the serum bilirubin level. Most of the patients are malnutrition, and therefore what that serum bilirubin level, improving its level by using whatever supplements which are available in market. They do
So
not
you're saying
work so
albumin or bilirubin, sir? Albumin, no?
Bilirubin.
serum albumin.
Albumin, yeah. So, sir, serum albumin is acute phase reactant as well. It is not just a nutritional marker, but it is acute phase reactant as well. So, if the patient has some acute condition, so these patients, even if you give whatever amount of nutrition, IV albumin, then albumin levels will not go high because it has reacted to the acute condition and has fallen to that level. So, but even if you are given nutrition, albumin has not increased, but other parameters are improved, then you should that will help in post-operative recovery for these patients.
Okay.
So you need not change the serum albumin levels after giving nutrition.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Sir,
you, Vak
can I
sir.
just add to one thing which Vak sir had asked of just Rajulas? Can I add to it? So the problem that in private practice we cannot have an adequate time to optimize the patient. That is always there because patient has come to our OPD and he is asking कि sir हम आ गए हैं, हमारी गाड़ी है, जल्द से जल्द operation कर दो. Even if it's a malignancy, we don't get adequate time to optimize. So a midway for that is whenever you see a patient in your OPD, like a malignancy patient, what we do is from OPD itself, we start them on a high protein diet like a protein powder spirometry because they have to go for endoscopy or a colonoscopy, biopsy, CT scan. Then they are being told about the finances. Then most of these patients have 5 to 7 days in between. From the time we see them in OPD to the time they land up on OT table, they still have 5 to 7 days, like getting their biopsy report, optimization. So what we should do is as soon as we see in OPD, if it's an obstructive jaundice, we know it's a periampullary tumor, he may go for this and that, a clinical judgment, then you just start them on spirometry and all those things immediately on the OPD itself. That's what we do so that we get at least a 5 to 7 days time to optimize this patient. If the patient is coming to a government medical college or like I work in Tukuduji Cancer Hospital also, there the patients don't complain much for number of days. So we keep them in our ward for 5 to 7 days. We optimize them. We start them on spirometry. We ask them to move around in the ward as much as possible, climb up the stairs up and down in day 2, 3 to 4 times. That way we optimize the patients in like Tukuduji Cancer Hospital. But in private, it's very difficult, as sir said.
Yeah. But only thing that 5 to 7 days might not be enough for the nutrition to improve and give a desired result. But whatever we can do, that will have definitely some good effect in the post-operative recovery. So whatever minimal we can do in our practice should be done.
Should be done. So even the simplest option is start everything in OPD basis itself. A multivitamin, protein powder, Threptin biscuits. Ask them to eat eggs, spirometry, and all those things in OPD itself. As soon as you see the patient, even if the patient is not coming back to you, he goes to someone else. End of the day, the patient is going to get benefit with that.
Yeah, get benefit.
Yes, definitely agree.
Absolutely agree with you.
We have Desai sir with us. Desai sir, I unmuted your mic. Desai sir is ASN president. Desai sir, are you there? Hello sir,
Yeah.
we can
Am I
hear you.
audible?
Yes sir, yes,
Okay.
please.
Yeah, excellent optimization of patients and a good presentation by Rajulas. Just a small brief comment. Most of our patients are today having comorbidities in the form of diabetes, hypertension, hypothyroidism. So one often neglected point is hypothyroidism, and sometimes a lot of problems can be there in the post-op period. So how do you optimize such patients? What is the ideal level of TSH if a patient is hypothyroid?
Sir, I mean, these patients' ideal level should be normal level. So, if it's haywire beyond 2 digits, then definitely it is a very high risk. And for elective surgery, you should postpone the surgery, ask them to follow with the endocrinologist, and get that level corrected to as normal as possible. Ideal will be normal, and optimal you can see is somewhere near in only 1 digit or 2 digit difference. If the value is more than 50, definitely you don't want to operate this because their post-operative recovery will be quite erratic, and it might not give you a good amount of recovery in the post-operative period. Because the patient rate will be way beyond what we expect or anticipate.
Right. Yeah. So thank you so much. Nice presentation.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Desai sir. We have Padole sir with us. Padole sir is a senior surgeon. Sir, I unmuted your mic. You may say some comments or ask some questions if any.
Sir, can you hear me?
Sir,
Yes,
we can.
yes, sir. I can hear you, sir.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Hello?
Sir, we can
Hello?
hear you. Please go ahead. Sir, we
Hello?
can hear you. Please go ahead.
Please,
Hello?
Sir, we can hear you.
One
Please
comment.
go ahead.
on your
One comment only. When we are dealing with the chronic anemic patient
Yes,
and undergoing surgery, proposed surgery, in addition to the reduced oxygen capacity after blood transfusion and taking patient immediately within 24 hours, the other problem is the concentric hypertrophy of the heart.
Yeah.
And before going to propose surgery, one must do the echocardiogram and cardiologist opinion to know the ejection fraction, so as to prevent the acute cardiac failure intraoperatively.
Definitely, sir. Absolutely right.
Right.
yes.
That what I
Okay.
wanted
Okay.
to
Thank
say.
you, sir.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
that
Okay.
is very, very true.
Okay. Thank you, Padole sir. We have Aurora sir with us. Aurora sir, I have unmuted your mic. Please unmute it on your side. Yes, Aurora sir.
Very nice presentation and very nice discussion also. I want to just add one thing, that when the patients are coming with nutritionally compromised status, what we are doing is just a simple thing. We are adding decadozobulin. We just, when the patient is coming for the first time also, we are giving decadozobulin 50 milligram. So it is helping in them. So some of what patients are comfortable with that. That's the only comment.
Sir, what is that product, sir? How does, I mean, I have not.
Decadozobulin, anabolic steroid.
Okay, steroid.
Okay.
Anabolic steroid. Decadozobulin.
Okay. I mean, we don't have a personal experience of that, sir, but definitely we'll have to try sometime to
Yeah,
see how.
it is anabolic. It helps in healing also.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay, sir. Suppose, sir, any more comments, Aurora sir?
I
No,
guess
no,
Dr.
very nice discussion.
Sir
It
has,
was topic which was not discussed earlier, but it is very necessary and essential topic. So nice discussion.
Thank you.
Good
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I suppose we don't have any other questions, so I would like.
Amit Pujari
Hello?
sir has raised his hand again. Atish sir.
Amit. Yeah, okay. Amit,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, sir. Just to continue the discussion which was started by Desai sir further, I would like to know, we come across some patients who are in semi-emergency need of semi-emergency need of surgery. Now, when we change the dose of the thyroxine, the change in the TSH value is not reflected before at least 4 weeks. So if
Definitely.
I have to operate such a patient, when we take the consultation of the physician here available in Varda, what they do is they double the dose for 7 days or 10 days. I don't know the rationale of that. So what is your opinion? How to judge the exact level or desired level of TSH in such patients if I have to operate before 4 weeks?
So the only thing what we can do is pre T3 and T4 levels. But even by giving thyroxine in double doses, it will not have. I mean, although the serum levels will be higher, but the desired preservation effect will not be there, which you are looking for. So they still might have complications which are related to hypothyroidism, and we have to be ready to deal with them. There's no other optimization is possible to do within 2, 3, 4 or a week like that. So for we have to go ahead with surgery and be ready. Whatever complications are there, that we will manage with the help of our endocrinologist or the physician friend and take the patient out of that soon.
So can I add?
Thank you.
Can I add to it, Rajulas?
Yeah,
So,
please.
so the thing is, sir, as you said, the physicians double the dose of thyroxine. So the aim of just doubling the dose of thyroxine is not to get the TSH back to normal. It is just to increase some serum T3, T4 level, which has half-life of around 9 to 10 days. So just by doubling the dose, they are giving us adequate T3, T4 so that our perioperative period goes off smoothly. The rationale,
Yes, sir.
my wife is a physician. She always used to give fitness to my patients there. So she used to say, कि hypothyroidism is not a very big issue in post-operative patients. It's hyperthyroidism which is a big problem. So if TSH is more than 100 or something like that, then it can cause a trouble. But a TSH between 50, 60 is not a big deal or not a big issue. So raising the dose from 50 to 100 microgram and giving it for 3 to 4 days and taking up a patient for surgery is not going to cause much harm. That's what physicians say. And once the surgery is done, then over a period of 2 to 3 weeks, they taper the dose or they titrate the dose and get everything on normal. So one of the things which I have found, there is a very huge incidence of asymptomatic hypothyroidism in our patients. If we just start doing TSH for each and every of our surgical patients, we will find nearly 30 to 40% of the patients will have TSH, which is more than upper limit of normal, in which a minimal dose of 25 to 50 is started up.
Yogesh,
And
I want to
earlier,
comment on this.
this was not. Yes. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
If we are
Yes, sir.
operating in spinal anesthesia, then there is no problem. But when the patients of hypothyroidism are coming out of anesthesia, then the metabolism of the drugs are means impaired. So the possibility of reversal
Yes, sir.
means there are so many problems with reversal. So the if we give
Yes, sir. Yes.
Eltroxin or something like that for a week or so, we can operate.
Yes, sir. That's what. So
We need not
hypothyroidism is not a
to.
problem. Hyper is a bigger issue. Hyper is a bigger issue.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Atish,
Amit.
sir.
Thank you, Arora sir. Thank you, Yogesh. Thank you, Rajvilas. I suppose
Thank you
as
so
there
much,
are no more questions, we can end this webinar. Thank
sir.
you,
Yeah,
Rajvilas.
Atish, sir.
Yeah.
Because
Atish,
nice
sir, I have to get my means Friday's speakers online to just have a trial run. So I request everyone to switch off their I'll just have a trial run with Kaustubh sir, Meenakshi ma'am.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Raju.
Okay.
Thank you, Yogesh. Thank you, Atish, sir.
Thank you,
Bye,
Rajvilas. Bye.
Meenakshi ma'am, please unmute
Hello.
your mic, Meenakshi. Yeah, Kaustubh sir, just a minute. I'll get Meenakshi
Okay.
ma'am online, then yeah. So
Thank
Meenakshi ma'am, I have made you presenter. On your laptop, you can see share your screen. There is an option of share your screen or show your screen. Meenakshi ma'am. Hello.
Hello.
Meenakshi
Can
ma'am.
you hear me?
Yeah, ma'am.
Huh.
I can hear you, ma'am. On your screen, you might have seen an option of show your screen.
Oh, I have clicked. Yes.
Yeah, but I can't see your screen as of now. Just share your screen.
Show screen. I have clicked on show screen.
Okay.
Just a minute. Net connection has problem. I will just turn it on hotspot. Just a minute.
I'll take Kaustubh sir till that time.
Okay.
Yeah, Kaustubh sir, share your screen. Kaustubh sir. Yeah, I can see your screen. आपका mic unmute कर लीजिए sir. Yeah.
Is it okay now?
Yeah. Please open presentation.
I will just show the video of mine.
Yeah, no issue. Just show the video.
Yeah. Is it visible, Yogesh?
Yeah. We can see the video completely.
Yeah.
So we can listen to you. We can see your screen and video. और आपका webcam तो चालू ही था. आप webcam एक बार share कर लीजिए sir.
Is it okay?
Yeah. Yes, yes. So we are seeing all the three things: your video, audio, as well as your webcam. Okay.
Fine.
So I'll generate a link tomorrow.
Okay.
Tomorrow evening I'll generate the link,
fine.
and then आपको वो link click करके join करना है Friday को, right, sir?
That's great. Okay, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Chalo, thank you. Yeah.
ठीक है, कुछ नहीं होता. Yeah, Meenakshi ma'am, I have made you presenter again. Please share your screen. Yeah, Meenakshi ma'am, can you listen to me? Please share your screen. Yeah, I can see your screen now. Open your PowerPoint, ma'am. I can't listen to you, ma'am. आपका आवाज नहीं आ रहा है.
Now can you listen?
Yes. I can listen to you.
Okay.
I can see your webcam also. Just open your presentation, ma'am.
हाँ. Just a minute.
मैम वो नीचे में है presentation.
नहीं. Just.
आप phone का audio use कर रहे हो, ma'am? I guess you are using audio through your phone and your.
Yeah. No, because that is only working.
Okay, no issue, ma'am. ऐसा ही करेंगे उस दिन भी, no problem with this.
हाँ. No.
मैम ये फोल्डर में सबसे नीचे में है presentation.
Okay.
वो स्क्रीन दिख रहा है यहाँ पे. I can see that. ये pan pseudo last row में
Okay, so is it visible?
Yes, ma'am. I can see your webcam. I can listen to you, and I can see even your presentation.
Okay, so today I will be presenting a case of 35-year-old male.
Yeah, ma'am.
So
Done.
I will try to run the videos. We will just see.
हाँ, बिल्कुल.
Okay, I think it's running. Can you see it? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. I can see it, ma'am. I can see to it, ma'am.
Okay.
अच्छे से दिख रहा है.
No, but can you see this right side screen?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
No,
So
but I will not.
No, ma'am. What you have to do, that control panel is there, ना? उसके ऊपर red arrow है सबसे ऊपर. Hide the control.
Yeah.
You just that.
हाँ. Okay. But there is so much of echo, no, in voice.
Yeah, because we are using two things, na. We are using your laptop as well as here. Now there won't be any echo. Now talk.
No, while listening.
No. Now there is no echo. Now see.
Okay.
Now you can. Now there is no echo.
So I will just make the same thing on Friday. Okay.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
ठीक.
Ma'am, you can log out, ma'am.
Yeah.
सर आप फ्री हो सर? आ जाइए ना सर, मैंने लिंक भेजा है आपके ईमेल पे, जस्ट क्लिक दैट लिंक एंड कम ऑन. So good evening everyone, welcome to the 41st session of our webinar meetings which we are putting up since lockdown. So today we have a very special guest, one of my very dear friend and my senior from the Institute of West Technology, Dr. Sanjeev Pan. Yeah, hello Pradeep sir. So your voice is not coming, otherwise I can see your screen. Start your PowerPoint sir. Sir, you are already logged in, sir. I can see your screen. Start your PowerPoint, sir. Sir, yeah, I can see you. I can see your webcam. I can see your screen. आपका PowerPoint ऑन कर लीजिए सर एक बार. हाँ, ऑडियो नॉइट, तो ऑडियो का ऑप्शन है सर यहाँ पे कंट्रोल पैनल में. गो टू वेबिनार का जो कंट्रोल पैनल आया है उसमें एक ऑडियो का ऑप्शन है, उसमें कंप्यूटर ऑडियो पे टिक कीजिए सर. ऑन है, फिर आ जाना चाहिए था क्योंकि डायरेक्ट ही आ जाता है सर वो. आपका वो ऊपर में एक ऑडियो का जो माइक है वो ग्रीन है या रेड है सर? कंट्रोल पैनल में एक माइक का ऑप्शन आता है सर वहीं पे. राइट साइड में। हाँ, वेबकैम के नीचे बाजू में, उसके बाजू में एग्जैक्टली एक छोटा सा माइक का लोगो दिखता है। ये आप ईयरफोन लगा के देखिए सर एक बार। उस दिन आपका ऑडियो एकदम क्लियर आया था सर। नहीं सर, अभी भी यहाँ मार्किंग आई नहीं है। नहीं ना सर, नहीं। क्यों, वहां पर कुछ ये हुआ क्या, चेंज किया आपने? हाँ, अभी आ गया, आ गया।
हाँ, ये आ गया। हाँ, राइट, आई कुड हियर दैट। हाँ,
या
तो
अभी आप आपका पावर पॉइंट ऑन कर लीजिए सर।
हाँ हाँ,
सो सर कल मैं आपको 7:50 7:55 को करीब कॉल करूंगा सर, एंड 8 o'clock विल
अच्छा,
स्टार्ट इट। सर
ओके,
लास्ट टाइम क्या हुआ था, शायद गड़बड़ प्रोबेबली आपने आपके तरफ से
हाँ,
स्टार्ट ब्रॉडकास्ट कर दिया था। ब्रॉडकास्ट शुरू हो गया था आपके तरफ से। सो पैनलिस्ट कुड लिसन टू यू बट ऑल द अटेंडेंट्स कुड नॉट।
ओके,
एंड उसके बाद फिर लॉग आउट होके वापस लॉग इन कर रहे थे अपन, तो बार बार ये बता रहा था कि द सेशन इज गोइंग ऑन, सेशन इज गोइंग ऑन।
करेक्ट,
ऑलराइट,
करेक्ट, हाँ,
तो
हाँ,
आप ब्रॉडकास्ट आप मत शुरू करना सर, मैं करूंगा यहाँ से शुरू, so that all the attendees
ओके,
and all who
ठीक
have
है,
joined through my link they will come in.
ओके,
Right, ये पावर
ओके,
पॉइंट तो लास्ट टाइम अपन ने रन करके देखा ही है सर, तो नो इश्यू विद दैट।
ओके। अच्छा, ये अभी दिखाई दे रहा है आपको फर्स्ट स्लाइड? तो
सर
स्लाइड
यस
शो
सर,
पर जाऊं? स्लाइड शो पर जाऊं अभी?
यस सर, यस सर।
हाँ, ओके, आ गया?
यस सर, यस सर, यस सर।
I'll just go forward. ठीक है
Yeah,
अभी?
yes, yes, yes sir, yes sir, we are seeing all the
Okay,
slides here.
right.
ठीक है सर। सो सर कल मिलेंगे सर शाम में, हम करते हैं सर, कल पक्का हो जाएगा अच्छे से मैनेज।
ओके, 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 हाँ, तो ठीक है, तो 7:45 या 8:40 को 7:40 को, 7:45 या 7:40 को हम लॉग इन कर लेंगे फिर।
चलेगा सर,
राइट,
चलेगा। ओके, राइट,
ओके,
गुड,
थैंक यू।
या।